The United Nations Summit Room was glowing, dozens of flags lined the walls. Leaders from every continent seated under golden lights. Cameras flashed, translators whispered, but then everything went still. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, dressed in his green uniform, walked calmly to the podium. Hadn't raised his voice. He didn't smile. He simply stared out at the world leader's eyes, sharp, jaw clenched. "There are things I need to say," he began slowly, his voice steady. "Not for applause, not for favor, but for justice." No one moved. "Because today, I speak not as a soldier. I speak as a son of a continent that has bled for centuries." Some diplomats shifted in their seats. Others looked at their translators. Confused, Traoré took a breath. "We welcomed you. You took our gold. You took our land. And when we cried, you sent silence." Gasps echoed. Cameras zoomed in. The summit was live in over 100 countries. Still, Traoré didn't blink. And somewhere in the second row, Donald Trump's expression tightened. What was this African captain about to reveal? The silence was over. The storm had begun. "I come here," Traoré continued, "carrying names. Names the world never said." He pulled out a folded list. It shook slightly in his fingers. "Not from fear, but fury. These are the names of 138 children," he said. "All under the age of 10. All died from hunger in Burkina Faso this year alone." The room fell into a heavy silence. No stern headline, no state funeral, just dirt, silence, and a mother screaming Ginto, her hands. A few leaders lowered their eyes. But Traoré didn't look away. He turned tough. "U.S. delegation, you sent us weapons, not wheat. You trained our armies, but not our tikas. Why?" Trump crossed his arms. He whispered to someone. His jaw was coached. Trump leaned closer to Themic. "You want to talk about democracy," he said. "Then tell me, what democracy allows children to starve while billionaires count profits made from their suffering?" The air in the summit grew colder. "Mignon." The audience sat frozen. A few nodded slowly. Trump leaned forward. Visibly annoyed, his translator stopped speaking. The room was shifting. But Traoré was not done. "Today, I will speak every truth you tried to bury." From his jacket, Traoré slowly pulled out a brown folder. Cameras zoomed in. Diplomats whispered. Trump leaned back. "This," Traoré said, holding it up, "was never meant to be seen." He opened it carefully, revealing printed documents, maps, and photos. A U.S. document dated July 2022. Signed, sealed. It outlines the proposed extraction of African resources in exchange for military silence. Gasps exploded in the room. A woman in the German delegation clutched her as a reporter dropped his pen. Traoré's voice never wavered. "You claim to fight terrorism, but what about theater of poverty, of hunger, obsolescence?" He pointed to one photo in the file. "This is a village in my country bombed, accidentally during a No headline, no apology, just ashes." Trump shifted in his seat, visibly uncomfortable. He whispered to his aide. Then suddenly he stood. The room turned. Trump threw his earpiece on the desk and marched toward the exit. "You can't say that here," he barked. But Traoré didn't stop. He lifted his ice hand, spoke one more sentence as Trump walked out. "I thought this was the house of truth." The audience dead silent, but something had just been unleashed. As Trump stormed out, the cameras stayed on Traoré, but he wasn't watching Trump, who was staring at the file. He pulled out a photo creased, old, almost torn. "This boy," he said, voice cracking just slightly, "was 7. His name was Yakuba. He wore the same red shirt every day because it was the only one he had." The screen behind him displayed teenage, a small child smiling, his ribs visible through the thin cloth. 3 weeks after this photo, Yakuba died. Not from war, not from disease, but because his village's water was poisoned by mining Grunoff. Gasps again. "He never knew hope of it, but I do, and they're sitting in this very room." No one moved. Trump's voice was low now, barely more than a whisper. "Your companies met while our children drank poison." Silence. He didn't ask for justice. He asked for bread. Traoré looked down. "I told his mother I would speak his name. that Samayan would finally listen. The photo stayed on screen, frozen, and millions watching from home. Began Tokri. I buried my own mother in silence. Trey continued, eyes locked forward. No world leader came. No headlines, just dust. He looked up, pain sharp in his face. She died because there was no clinic. The nearest one was 86 kilometers away. She walked halfway, then collapsed. The room was paralyzed, and when I wrote to aid agencies for Hillip, I received an answer. He held up a letter, yellowed with age. Due to shifting priorities, your region no longer qualifies for medical aid. Someone in the back audibly gasped. And yet, Tro said, turning toward the delegates, a U.S. drone base was built just 3 kilometers from her grave. It cost $110 million. He paused. No medicine, but plenty of misos. A few people in the room bowed their heads. One African delegate wiped his eye. Traoré pointed to a map. This is not just about Burkina Faso. It is Mali. It is Congo. It is every mother. For said Do, choose which child gets to eat. He folded the paper quietly. I don't need your pity. I need you to stop pretending this isn't happening. And across the world, more people began to whisper, cry, and remember. The U.S. seat sat empty now. Trump had left, but not everyone ignored Truer's words. Across the room, a woman, an ambassador from a European nation, stood up. She didn't speak. She simply removed her earpiece, walked to the center of Therum, and whispered, I'm sorry. The room turned. I was stationed in West Africa. I saw what we did. I saw how we smiled for photos and looked away from the graves. Tears ran down her cheeks. We thought no one would speak, but now you have. Traoré didn't smile. He just nodded. I didn't want guilt, he said. I want honesty. He reached into the folder again, this time, pulling out a report. Bloodstained. Aid was denied to this village because it interfered with foreign investment. He looked at the audience. This isn't just about Africa. It's about what you for power. Then something strange happened. A delegate from Asia stood, then one from South America. One by one, people rose to their feet, and the world watching live began to realize this wasn't a speech. It was a reckoning. The camera stayed fixed on Captain Traoré, his hands gripping the sides of the podium. I want to show you something, he said softly. He turned to the screen behind him. A photo appeared. A boy lying on his stomach. His back was covered in dark, swollen scars. This is my brother. The room froze. He was taken to a gold mine when he was 12. The company said they were offering jobs, but there were no helmets, no food, just children with shovels and guards with sticks. Trop's voice cracked for the first time. One day, he collapsed from hunger. They beat him for slowing down. The room gasped. I was 19 when I found him. Heckled and walk. Trey stepped back. They called it foreign investment. We validate slavery. A diplomat shifted awkwardly in his seat. Another wiped their eyes. My brother survived, Trey added, but he never smiled the same again. He turned it back to the audience. Tell me, what does our GDP mean if it breaks the back of Oakwood? There was no applause, just silence, and an entire world watching, now completely still. Traoré held up Esmail cloth, a baby blanket faded, and this was found beneath Adamalish village, he said. The village no longer exists. It was bulldozed, Tomic room for an oil operation. The lights dimmed as a satellite photo appeared on the screen. A wide, dusty patch of land where houses once stood. No relocation, no warning, just machines. He looked down. There was a family, a father, a mother, and a child, just 6 months old. Traoré held up a second photo, a mass grave marked by a cross made from scrap metal. The oil deal was signed in 2021. It was approved to be 3 governments. One of them is represented in this room. He looked directly at the Western delegates. The Bobby blanket was still in his hand. This cloth, he said, voice trembling, was wrapped around a child whose name the world never learned. A woman in the audience began crying. He went to that site. I knelt and faltered, and I swore if I ever got that chance to speak for them, I would. Then Traoré looked into the camera, and now EOM, As the summit continued in stunned silence, Traoré did something you expect. He pulled out a letter. This, he said, holding it up, is from the UN Secretariat. It asked me to adjust my speech, remove the parts about us operations, about corporate deals, about names. Opposed. I refused. He placed the letter on the podium, and just 2 hours before the summit, a delegate came to my room. He said, "If you say too much, Ulo's allies." True's eyes burned. I didn't come here for allies. I came for truth. The audience stared motionless. Some of you, he said, sweeping his gaze across the hall, have made peace with injustice. You say it's complicated, but it's not. He pointed to the baby blanket on the podium. A child buried beneath oil is not complicated. It's evil. Then he leaned forward. You can block my words, but you cannot block the tears of a mother burying her child. The camera zoomed in on his face. The world watching had goosebumps. And for the first time in years, truth was louder than politics. Traoré cleared his throat. His voice had dropped lower, slower, as if heavy with memory. This, he said, pulling out a charred school book, was from a primary schooling, Jibo. He turned it around to the camera. The cover was melted at the edges. A child's name, Fatima D., was barely legible in pencil. This school was burned to the ground, not by terrorists, but by mercenaries paid to secure resources. He paused. There were 43 children inside. Only 11 made it out. A woman in the press section choked back a sob. I visited the village 2 weeks later. Trey continued. A mother came home. She held this book to her chest and said, "This is all I have left." The room was ice. He turned toward the camera. You say you're bringing peace, but what peace uses fire to erase futures? Traoré placed the book gently on the podium, like it was made of glass. Then her looked up. Fatimata wanted to be a doctor, but now her only legacy, as the image of the book alone, on the podium, went viral within minutes. But Traoré wasn't done. The deepest pain was still to come. He pressed a button. The screen behind him lit up. Grainy drone footage from 2021. A convoy of black trucks rolled through Sahel, flying no flags. Thetum stamp flickered. No press was allowed here. But this footage was leaked by someone who could no longer stay silent. He turned to the crowd. These were private contractors, funded through a shell company in the West, as the video played. The truck stopped outside a village. People ran. There were no warning shots. The screen turned black. 3 hours later, 28 people were dead. Notabels, farmers. Gasps echoed across that. You'll find no report, no accountability. But we kept the names. We remember the faces. Traoré pulled out a hand-drawn picture. Oakle's drawing. A sun, a tree, a man with a red scarf. This was drawn by a boy named Musa. His father was one of the 28. He held it up. Musa doesn't talk anymore. The picture shook in his hands. And I ask you, how can your silence be louder than music? Now, some delegates were openly crying, but Traoré still had more, because Stefano's photo was personal. He reached into his folder one last time, and this time he pulled out a photo. It was blurry, dusty, but sharp enough to see a woman in a blue dress, cradling a young boy barely breathing beside a well. The entire room stared. She is my aunt, Traoré said quietly. Thebo was her son. He held the photo gently, like it could fall apart in his hands. They walked 6 kilometers for water. Theowell had been poisoned by illegal waste dumping from a foreign mining company. He paused. She tried to carry him back. He died before they reached home. Traoré placed a photo down on the podium with both hands. She begged me not to speak. She said, "You will make enemies." He looked directly into the camera. Booty made her a promise that the world would know that her son would not die in silence. He stepped back. Then he said something that shook the summit and theward. Some of you in this room signed the deals that killed him. That's when Donald Trump had stood. That's when he walked out. And the internet caught fire. Traoré's voice softened. I received a phone call the night before this speech. It wasn't official. It wasn't recorded. But I remember every word. He paused. The room held its breath. The voice on the line said, "We know what y'all were planning." Speaking, You won't leave New York with your dignity or your life. Gasps echoed across the chamber. It wasn't just a threat. It was a warning dressed in power. He placed his phone on the podium. But I'm still here. He scanned the room slowly. And I am not afraid. One African leader stood in silent solidarity. Another followed. Traoré's eyes welled just slightly. For too long, Africa has been told to keep quiet, to stay small, to trade its truth for survival. He pointed to the screen behind him. A map appeared highlighting dozens off-script deals involving resource extraction across West Africa. Signed, hidden, erased, and beneath each deal, the name of the companies involved. A red box circled one. It read Trump International Energy Holdings. The room exploded with whispers. Now, the picture was clear. That was the name Traoré said that made Trump rise. I never knew my father well, Traoré said quietly. He held up a faded photo. A man in uniform, standing proudly beside a mud hut. He was a soldier, too. He died when I was 12, ambushed on a dusty road outside Wahi. Traoré placed the photo down gently. But before he died, he sent me a letter. Unfolded a small paper, yellowed, torn at edges. In childlike handwriting, each read, "Son, one day you will face them, not with guns, with words. Don't be afraid to tell the truth, even if it breaks you." Traoré's hands trembled slightly. Headied, believing his truth would never be heard. The camera zoomed in on his face, raw, vulnerable. I carried that pain for years until now. He looked at the audience, and so, today, I stand here, not as a rebel, not as a president. It's down here as a son, as a brother, as a man who refuses to forget. The silence was overwhelming. No applause, just the quiet sound of people crying in their seats. And somewhere backstage, a journalist whispered, "This is a story. There's one more thing," Traoré said, reaching into the folder one last time. He held up a white envelope. "This is a letter I sent to President Donald Trump 4 years ago." The room shifted. Journalists leaned forward. Cameras zoomed in. "I sent it during a famine in the Sahel. We had nothing. No wood, no rain, no attention. I thought maybe he would listen." He opened his envelope and unfolded the letter. It was written in French, but the screen behind him displayed its English translation. "Mr. President, we are dying. Not from war, but from the weight of being ignored. Please, if you can help us, we will never forget it." The room was frozen. I never received a reply. Traoré looked down. His voice cracked. "Instead, a U.S. firm signed a 40-year lease on our copper reserves." A photo flashed on the screen. Thousands of Burkina familiars walking miles for water. "You say we're poor, but you never count what was taken from us." He folded the letter again and placed it beside his father's note. 12 letters, one from a dying father, one to a deaf world, and the silence after, louder than any speech. Traoré took one last breath. Then he stepped away from the podium. For a moment, the entire summit stood in absolute silence. Not a cough, not a whisper. Then it happened. A delegate from Norway stood and clapped. Then one from Brazil. Then the entire African Union, one by one, world leaders, some teary, some trembling, stood to applaud. Many weren't clapping for politics. They were clapping for truth. For the 7-year-old boy in a red shirt, for Musa. For the baby wrapped in a blanket beneath poison soil. A BBC journalist tweeted, "I've covered 27 summits. I've never cried behind the camera until today." Live feeds flooded with comments. "I'm in tears. This man speaks for all of us. Why isn't this all over the news? I didn't know who Traoré was. Now I'll never forget him." And yet, Ibrahim Traoré didn't raise his fist. He didn't smile. He simply picked up the 12 letters on the podium and walked out of the room. As he did, even critics stood and bowed their heads. Because in one day, one man had changed the conversation forever. Within 24 hours, the video had over 200 million views. From village radios in Burkina Faso to classrooms in Brazil, people watched in stunned silence. Children gathered around TVs and markets. Teachers paused lessons to play the full speech and aired it without commentary. People weren't just watching. They were. A letter from a mother in Haiti went viral. I watched with my daughter. We cried together. She asked me, why did no one ever tell us the truth before? Universities across the world added this speech to their curriculum. The African Union called an emergency session, but most unexpected. A group of retired U.S. veterans, re-elicitor, public statement. It read, we wear a Z, lied to. We stand with Captain Ibrahim Traoré, and we are sorry. Meanwhile, Trump refused to speak to Thepers, but it didn't matter anymore. The world had already spoken. The story was no longer about politics. It was about Theoling and Trump. He had quietly returned to Burkina Faso, where 1,000 villagers waited with drums, tears, and open arms. But there was still one thing left to say. Trump stood alone at a small grave. The wind was quiet. The sky was soft with dust. He bent down slowly and placed a photo of the woman in the blue dress, his aunt, beside a flower carved from stone. Beside it, he laid 12 things, his father's letter, and the white envelope. Trump never answered. I kept my promise, he whispered. They heard you. The whole world did. A tearing down his face. Not for show, not for politics, but for peace. Behind him, children played in the distance on new school benches built from donated wood. A clinic was being painted by volunteers. The world hadn't changed overnight, but it had started. Albacoss, one man refused to stay silent. Trump stood, wiped his eyes, and looked toward the horizon. Then he whispered to no one in particular. Truth doesn't it multiplies. The screen faded to black. If this story touched your heart, don't leave quietly. Drop a comment. Let your voice be heard. Like the video if you believe truth still matters. Share it so the world never forgets their names. And subscribe, because the next truth is coming.